Hey everybody, welcome to Bill Sky, the COBOL guy? Oh my god, what is this old man doing making me watch this video? First of all, I'm not making you do anything. You're here because you're curious about the COBOL language. You did a search on the internet, you might have stumbled upon this video, or maybe one of your friends or somebody you knew on the internet pointed you here. Well, COBOL is not dead. COBOL is a language it actually stands for Common Business Oriented Language. And it was one of the very first languages produced in the 1950s. Actually, it was produced on the year of my birthday, 1959. All good things came out of 1959. And it was really meant to support businesses because computers were just coming into their own. They were becoming more than just a scientific tool, and businesses were looking at it. In fact, I remember there was I wasn't there, but back in the late 40s, there was a business in the UK. I can't remember what they were manufacturing, something retail, and they created an entire computer company around that business. So computers are not there to remove your jobs. They're not there to take over from humanity. They're really there to make our jobs easier. So as I said, it began development in 1959. It was built for easier development of business applications. So back then, we really only had assembler language or even machine language, and it was just impossible. And there was an admiral in the U.S. Navy, happened to be a woman, who actually came up with this whole idea of creating an easier to use language. Thank you so much, Admiral, for your work, for your help, because that was the beginning of higher level languages on computers. So as I said, COBOL is really meant to support business application development. It still does generate a lot of revenue for companies like IBM, Micro Focus. I think there's one or two other retail COBOL products out there because there's 800 billion lines of code, and that's a conservative estimate. But there's 800 billion lines of COBOL code out there, and I can charge quite a bit of money for my hourly fee because there's so few COBOL programmers out there. So why is it important for you to learn programming in COBOL? Because it extends your marketability. It makes the spectrum of what you know bigger. So like if there's going to be a layoff at your company and they find out that you know COBOL or Fortran or assembler where everybody else doesn't, who do you think they're going to stick around? They're going to keep sticking around. They're going to be looking at you. So it's always a good idea to know as much as you can, learn as much as you can. You can buy COBOL compilers, like I said, from IBM or Micro Focus. Micro Focus was just recently taken over by another company, and I'm having a little bit of a trouble finding their compiler product. Doesn't mean it's not there, it just means that I haven't spent enough time looking. But then there's one or two free ones, and the one that we're going to look at is one called Open COBOL. Today it's called GNU-Cobol. It's completely free. You can do it on Windows, Linux. I haven't seen it used on Mac, but there's ways around that. We're going to be talking about that. And we're going to be primarily concentrating on GNU-Cobol. So I'm going to take you there, and we're going to actually install it today. So why is COBOL in the news? Why have you heard stuff about it? Because all companies that have COBOL source code are in trouble. Their programmers are retiring. I retired recently, but I'm still doing coding on the side. Nobody's being trained in COBOL in college, and new programmers are being very short-sighted about older languages because there's a lot of code out there. You know, some of my students would complain about having to learn assembler language. Well, there's assembler language everywhere. You've got to know these lower-level languages as well as these older languages to become more marketable. So what I want to do is in this video we're going to install GNU-Cobol on Windows. We're going to do it using MSys2. I'm going to have links in the description of this video that take you to my infrastructure installation programs like VMware, MSys2. You can get more details about that. I did that in my assembler coding, videos, but we're going to do as much as we can here so you don't have to jump around videos. So let's get started by installing it on Windows first, and we're going to use MSys2, and then let's move on to Linux. So here you see my Windows. I actually have Windows 11 open up here, And I'm going to bring up my browser. And this is a version of Windows 11 that I really have nothing installed other than just the basic Windows operating system. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to type, okay, I got it. And if you're wondering, I'm using this on VMware. You can use it on VirtualBox as well. It's a Windows version that is that's installed on VMware, so I can do multiple things at the same time on my big Mac. So msys2 download. So I'm going to do a msys2 download search. And this is Microsoft Edge and Bing, so I'm not sure what we're going to get. But yeah, it took me to the right place. So I want to do msys2.org. And from there, I'm just going to download this installer. Now what we're going to do is we're going to download and install msys2, but then once that's installed, we actually have to install some other tools to get ready for COBOL development, as well as C or C++ development. Now all of this is in my previous videos, my assembly language course, where I talked about setting up the environment, but we're going to run through this rather quickly and get everything installed. So I'm going to double click on the msys2 installer, and I'm just going to say next. I'm going to leave the default C:\\M664. I recommend that you do that too, because some of these tools don't work well with directories that have spaces in them. So just leave that there. Just everything default. Okay, once the installation is done, go ahead and just click on that Run msys2 now. The other thing you could do is go down here to the search bar and just type msys2, and you should see it there. I typed in some characters I don't need, and there's my msys2 msys. So you can do it that way as well, but I'm going to just go ahead and start it from here. And what you're going to see is this is an Arch Linux terminal, and it's actually not Linux, it's an emulator of Linux. The msys2 technology uses that. And so what we're going to do is we're going to execute some commands, and I'm going to put these commands in the video description. And pacman-syu, what that's going to do is it's going to update all of the installation components and all of the infrastructure. It's not too big because I just downloaded a brand new msys2. So it goes ahead and it downloads all that stuff. And then we've got some development tools to install. So this installation doesn't really install any development tools. It just installs the infrastructure for the compiler and everything. And then we're going to go ahead and install the compiler. Now it's going to ask you to restart it, so just say yes. So now the msys2 environment is restarted, and let's go ahead and, or it's been updated, and let's go ahead and restart it here. So now I'm going to do another command. Pacman is the package manager. Pacman-su, and let's see what that gets us. Okay, so that's going to get us some more updates. So I'm going to go, yes, let's update all that. And what is it doing? It's going out to a msys2 server, an msys server, and it's downloading tools onto in your msys2 environment, making sure everything is okay, updating catalogs, all kinds of stuff. And this is kind of like if you go to check for updates on Windows, but it's using the command line. It's a little bit more informational as to what it's doing, and it doesn't take any amount of time compared to the Windows update. So it's almost done here. So after that, we're going to install the actual development tools, and then we will install GNU-Cobol. So, and then I'm going to also show you, now you can't do that on Windows, you have to do it on Linux, but I'm also going to show you in a later part of this video how to install IBM Cobol, so you can have both of those running at the same time. Okay, so let's go ahead and let's do the command and again I'm going to go ahead and post these. Oh, I didn't type in pacman. So that's going to install the needed base development tools. You have to get it right. Okay, min-gw, oh, w64 dash, oh, I got that wrong, w64 dash x86 underscore. And I think it took it this time. It says, do you want to install all that? Yes. Oh, I'm just going to press enter. Yes, proceed with the installation. And it's going to go ahead and install all the tools. Now this is going to take a few minutes. Let it finish. We've got a couple of other installations to do that aren't anywhere near as big, but this is going to install the MinGW C++ compilers, the linkers, all that stuff. And it's going to take a little while. It looks like there's 58 packages. It's looking at 58 out of 58. And you can see its progress, and it'll go ahead and install it. Let that go ahead and finish installing. All right, once that's done, let's go ahead and do another command. I'm just going to press the key, the arrow up key, and let's do development. Yep, let's get all that installed. Oh, I keep pressing yes. Read the instructions. Default equals also press enter. Then it asks me if I want to do it. So go ahead and install that. It looks like it's going to be 500 megabytes. It's going to download 75 megabytes and install 500 megabytes. So this is going to install the rest of the development tools that you need. Now we are going to install a couple of editors because this is a command line environment. And then we're going to go ahead and install the GNU-Cobol. So let's let this finish up installing. All right, once that's installed, let's do a couple other things too. Now, before we do those other things, I'm going to show you something. The font on this MSys screen is pretty small. So I'm going to go up here to the top left icon, go down to options, go to text, and I'm going to select a different font. Let's go to 14 and then click apply, and now that's much better. You can do other things like font smoothing and things like that to make it look a little bit better. So I'm going to click on save there. All right, much nicer. So let's go ahead and install an editor. So I'm going to say pacman-s vim. Let's go ahead and install that. Now we're only installing one thing at a time here, so it's pretty quick. And then there's one other editor I want to install, and that's Nano. Now what we're doing is you don't have to do things in this Linux terminal. You can do things outside of Linux or outside of this window using GUI tools. And there aren't a lot of Cobol GUI tools out there. Okay, let's install the next editor. Okay. So once we have all that done, let's now go ahead and install the compiler, the Cobol compiler. Now, just to make sure, before we do that, I'm going to type G++. That's the G++. That wasn't installed. I think if you say GCC, oh, that wasn't installed either. Well, it did install it. Let's go down here now and exit out of this. And now I'm going to go to search. I'm going to say MinGW, or no, I'm sorry, not MinGW, MSys. And we're looking for the MSys MinGW64. So if I click on that, that is the MinGW 64-bit development environment. And if I type G++, you can see that it's there. GCC, you can see that that's there. LD is a linker, that's there. Now, I'm getting errors because I'm not doing anything. The programs are telling me they're messed up. So what you do is you install stuff using the MSys2, and then you go to the development environment that you're going to be using. So let's go to MSys2, MSys again. And now let's install the GNU-Cobol. Now, if you don't want to have to type in that whole thing, well, you do have to type the whole thing in, but there's also another thing you can do. Say pacman-s, capital S, lowercase s. And what that's going to do is it's going to list every package out in that repository that you can install. If I type in GNU-Cobol, it'll show me only the GNU-Cobol packages that are available for you to install. And here's the one that we're going to install right here, this MinGW x86. Now there are MinGWs for the different compilers, like there's the CLang compilers, the UCRT, but we're going to use the MinGW. So let's say the pacman-s MinGW W64 x86 64 GNU-Cobol. So let's go ahead and install that. Now while that's installing, I do want to talk about how the MinGW, or I'm sorry, the GNU-Cobol compiler works. What it does is it generates C code, and then the GCC compiler compiles that. So GNU-Cobol, previously OpenCobol, is not a direct from source code to assembler language or to machine code. it actually uses the GCC compiler to do that. So it generates the C code. And that's actually very educational, because when it generates the C code, you can actually look at the C code and kind of see the equivalence between COBOL and C. Okay, so I'm going to exit out of that. And now I'm going to go back here and I'm going to say msys, and here's my MinGW64. I'm going to click on that and I'm going to type cobc, and you can see that there's an error. I'm going to say cobc -- version, and it shows me the version 3.2. This is like it's release candidate 2, so there's maybe a little bit of beta code in there, but that's okay. We're doing this to learn. Okay, so we've got all that taken care of. Now, there is something else that we want to do. We want to set up the environment to be able to access everything in the GCC or in the COBOL. So it looks like we're in pretty good shape here, because we can type cobc -- version. I'm going to do nano, and I'm going to say /.bash rc. Now what bash is the born again shell, and what the .bash rc file is the configuration file to how things should start up when you load up the MSys2. How should things load up in the shell for you? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to make sure that I put the path for GNU-Cobol into the environment. So if you don't know what a path is the search path that the operating system uses. Windows uses this, Linux uses this, Mac OS uses this. It's an environment variable. It's part of the operating system that says where are all the programs installed. And it looks like after installing GNU-Cobol under MinGW, MSys2, MinGW64, it already has that in the path. But I'm going to put that in there anyway. I'm press Control X, save, and press Enter. And I'm going to say echo $path, and you can see everything that is in the path. So when you execute a program, it's going to look in all of the directories here. Now it looks like the MinGW bin is already there, so we really didn't need that. So I'm going to go back in there and I'm going to delete that line, because it looks like for MinGW, so let's go ahead and delete that. And now when I exit, keep typing that in wrong. I should be able to get to cobc. Now it already worked for me, so that's not an issue. Okay. So we've got that all set up. Now, but here's the thing. I'm going to load up. Now I'm going to exit out of this, and I'm going to load up a Windows terminal. So I'm just going to type in terminal and press enter, and I'm going to type cobc. Now this is not the MSys2 terminal. This is the Windows terminal. And the Windows terminal is very useful to see what the environment of your operating system is. And if you notice, it doesn't know what cobc is. So we have to change that in the path for the operating system. So I'm going to take a look at MSys2, and let me see, what was that? It was MSys64. So I'm going to change directory to MSys64, and there's a bunch of stuff there. And right here is our MinGW64. So I'm going to change directory, MinGW64, and we see a bin. I'm going to change directory to bin, and there's a lot of stuff in there. I'm just going to type cobc. It still can't find it. I'm going to type cobs.\cobc and see if it finds it, and it does find it. So if you're in the directory, if you're in the folder where the program is installed, and you try to run it, it will run. But if you're outside of that folder, it won't run. I don't want to have to do that. I would like to be anywhere on my hard drive and be able to type cobc. So how do we do that? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to go down here to the Explorer, and I'm going to right click on this PC, and I'm going to click on Properties. And I'm going to scroll down to Advanced System Settings. I'm going to click on Environment Variables. I'm going to double click on the user variables for path. Now, if this was on a Windows server, which it probably won't be, you can come down here, or if you have multiple users on your computer that are going to want to do cobc, you might want to do it as a system variable. But you really don't have to do that. I'm just going to do it as a path, and I'm going to double click it. I'm going to click New. I'm going to click Browse, and I'm going to go down to this PC, local disk, MSys64, MinGW64, and I'm going to click on bin, double click on bin and press OK. So now you can see that that bin where my cobc was located is now part of the path. I'm going to click OK. I'm going to click OK. Close this down, click OK here. And now if I come over here and I say cobc, it still doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Because this terminal was opened up with the old path. So I'm going to exit out of this. I'm going to go down to search. I'm going to type terminal. And now if I type cobc, I get the configuration error that there's a problem there. Now, why am I getting that configuration error? Well, you have to do a special command on Windows when you're actually compiling with GNU-Cobol. When you say cobc, you have to say -config equals, and you have to specify, and I'll put this in the description, so you have to tell it where is the configuration file located, and I'm just going to say main.cbl. Okay, so we didn't get the configuration error this time. This time we got the error that it couldn't find the main.cbl file. Okay, and I know you might be itching, what does a COBOL program look like? Well, we're going to get there. We're going to do a lot. Okay, so that's how you set up GNU-Cobol on MSys2. Now, there's one other thing that I would like to do now, is I would like to show you how to do this from Linux within Windows. And what we're going to do is we're going to install the Windows Subsystem for Linux. All right, so we're back, and what I've done is I've created I have a brand new, newly installed Windows 11, and what we're going to do here is we're going to install the Windows Subsystem for Linux. Now, one thing I need you to understand is that while you're doing this, you must do this in exactly this order. I've tried to do this in different orders, and I can't get the WSL to work. So why are we doing this? Well, because Linux just is a better development environment than Windows. It just has a lot more to it. It's easier to use from the point of view of a developer, and it's a good experience for you to get into this. Also, things like IBM's COBOL, there is no Windows version because Windows is just not considered the most, well, people would argue with me, but they just isn't the most common server operating system out there. There might be entire companies that use Windows, but when you look at it globally, it's really Linux. It's really a Linux world. Supercomputers run on Linux. Mainframes run on Linux. So and there are some tools that are not available in Windows, and this is a good example. GNU-Cobol is really a Linux platform. And as I showed you in the MSys2, you can get it to work on Windows, but it really is not considered a production environment. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and install Windows Subsystem for Linux here. So the first thing that you need to do is make sure that your Windows is fully updated. Update everything. Go into check for updates, update everything. If you've never done that before, go into search and just type in check and say check for updates and update everything that you need. Now, I've updated this to the 2023 second half version of Windows 11, so it's really up to date. And once you get that done, go into the search and just type in turn. And there's a thing called turn Windows features on or off. Go ahead and start that up. And there's two things that you have to select here. And we're going to go down here. There's the subsystem, Windows Subsystem for Linux, and also there's the virtual machine platform. Now there's a couple other things. There's the Windows Hypervisor platform, and there's also the Hyper-V. You could select those. You don't really need them. It takes a long time. It limits what you can do on the Windows, using other virtualization like containers and things like that, Docker. So you just want to do those. Just go ahead and press OK, and let the setup install. It's like you're installing those free features of Windows. It's going to download some stuff maybe, And this happened very quick because I have a really big computer here, so I'm going to go ahead and click on restart now. And then let's see what happens after it restarts, what we have to do next. So it is going to install some stuff. So after you reboot, it's going to begin finishing up the customizing the features and doing all the installation. So go ahead and let that complete and then log back in. Once you log back in, and we're going to do that right now. Once you log back in, you're going to want to go into the Microsoft Store. Now the reason for this is because you need to download the actual Linux version that you want to download. And what you want to use. And what we're going to do is we're going to use Ubuntu, just because it's probably the most supported on Windows Subsystem for Linux, and it's also a very popular Linux operating system. So let's go ahead. So there's the Microsoft Store. I'm going to just type Ubuntu and press enter. And there's Ubuntu. Now there's a number of them. There's 2204, there's 2204, or 2004, and there's 1804. I like to click on the first one just that says Ubuntu, because what that does is it installs the most recent one. So go ahead and just click get, let that install. Now we're not going to be ready to run it yet. You don't want to actually run it. We can, and I can show it to you what will happen, but it'll tell you that you need to update your Windows Subsystem for Linux. Now why didn't we do that when we first set it up? Because for some reason, if you update it before you download the Ubuntu, it doesn't work. I don't know what the problem is. I've looked all over the internet. I'm thinking about opening up a problem with Microsoft. But when you do it in this order, it seems to work. So go ahead and let this finish installing, and then after this is installed, we're going to move on. Okay, once it's done, now I'm going to click on open here, and you're going to see the error that's going to be resolved by updating, and it opens it up in the back. It says here that it requires an update to its kernel. Windows Subsystem for Linux 2 requires an update to its kernel. Again, I don't know why we don't update it before we install the Ubuntu, but for some reason it didn't seem to work. So I'm going to go down here into search, and I'm going to do a search for terminal. And under terminal, I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to say run as administrator. And then we're going to issue the update command. Now you could say wsl-status, and it'll tell you that things need to be updated, and you can do that if you go ahead into the GUI, the check for updates, and you turn on receive updates for other Microsoft products when you update Windows. But I want to do it right now, so I'm going to say WSL update, and WSL stands for Windows Subsystem for Linux, and it's going to go ahead and download the newest kernel, and it's going to install it in your WSL too. And it actually happens pretty quick if you've got a reasonably fast computer. And then we're going to look at the status one more time. Okay, so we're going to say WSL status. Oh, it's still finishing up the upgrade. There it goes. So it says the default version is 2 for Windows Subsystem for Linux. Let's make sure it's installed it. Okay, good. So it's updated it okay. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and close that. And now I'm going to go back to search. I'm going to type Ubuntu and select the Ubuntu app, and what's going to do is it's going to set things up. It's setting up folders, it's setting up directories. I'm not sure what else, maybe configuration files in the etc directory. And then it's going to ask me for a user ID and a password. So I'm going to type in a very simple user ID. Make sure the password is very simple. Now, if you're going to be using WSL as a server platform, you might want to make the password more complicated. But in this case, we're just going to make it password. So my new Unix username is going to be Linux user. And it's going to ask me for a password. So I'm just going to type in password. And it goes ahead and updates it. It continues to get things ready. And now we're going to have to issue a number of commands. Now these commands are in the description of this video, so no problem. We had to do this with MSys. This is what you do to set up your environment. No problem. Now, one nice thing about using the Windows Subsystem for Linux, I'm going to press enter here because I think it's stuck. And there we go. So one nice thing about the Windows Subsystem for Linux, the new version 2, is that you can actually run Linux GUI applications, which is really cool. So the first thing I want to do is I'm going to say sudo apt update. It's going to ask me for my password, and it shouldn't ask me for that again. And what this is doing is it's downloading all of the catalogs and stuff that are used for installing software onto your Linux. And then after that's done, we're going to say sudo apt upgrade. And that's not going to be a huge upgrade. It's just going to use an additional 20K, which isn't that much. And what that does is it updates your operating system. It's kind of like check for updates on Windows. Sudo apt upgrade actually downloads things and updates your Windows, or your Linux, sorry. Now, that's not going to install any of the development tools. So we have a number of commands that we have to issue after we do this. Now, we don't have to reboot the Ubuntu like you would have to on Windows quite a bit, but we're going to go ahead and just install some things. Now, we're going to have to install Build Essentials. We're going to install a couple of nice editors, and then we're going to also install GNU-Cobol. And the install is a lot easier than it was on MSys, but I'll show you how to do that. Okay, so we're going to say sudo apt install. Now -y means I want to, yes. If it asks me if I want to install it after I press enter, it's just going to automatically say yes. And we're going to do Build Essentials. Now, why do we have to do this? Because GNU-Cobol uses the C language. So what it does is that it will actually generate C code from your Cobol program, and then it will run the GCC C compiler. And by doing Build Essentials, it does install that. So let's go ahead and let that finish. It also installs G++, which is their C++ compiler. And this is the GNU open source compilers that everybody in the industry uses other than Windows developers. Windows developers pretty much use Microsoft Visual Studio, Visual C++ libraries. Even Mac developers use the GNU. So, okay, so there we go. So now we're going to install a couple other things. I like to install a nice little editor called Genie, and that's going to install a bunch of stuff. I'm also going to install the Genie plugins. Now, I'm not going to have to type in the whole command every time. I'm going to use the arrow up key on my keyboard. So we're going to get this done pretty quick. You can even load a files. You can even load a files, like a file explorer on this Windows subsystem for Linux and make it look like it's actually a GUI. So go ahead and let the Genie install. It takes a couple of seconds. Then we'll install the Genie plugins. Then we're going to install a couple of other things that's going to make your life a little bit easier. But before we actually do those installs, I'm going to show you how you can actually load a GUI application. So I'm going to type Genie and then the ampersand sign after a space. And what that means is that run Genie, but then free up the terminal. So you can see the terminal. I can issue some more commands. Now, this is kind of an interesting thing that I've seen here with some of these GUIs. You get this funny little squiggly screen, but if you just click on it, most of the time you're okay. It's something to do with the graphics, and you may not see it on yours because I'm using Windows on VMware. Okay, so let's go ahead and close that. All right, let's install the Genie plugins, and then we'll install gedit, which is a much smaller editor, which is a GUI editor, which you might like to use instead. And then we're going to go ahead and make a directory for the documents so you can put your Cobol programs in there. So go ahead and let the plugins finish. We'll install gedit, and then we'll be done. Okay, once that's done, let's go ahead and install a very small editor, GUI editor that you might like, called gedit. So I can start gedit just like I did Genie. But I'm getting some, like I said, I'm getting some funny graphic things, probably because I'm on a VMware guest. So it shouldn't really cause a problem for you if you're just on Windows. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to install is GNU-Cobol. So one way to do that, I'm going to say sudo apt search Cobol. And what this is doing is this is going out onto the internet and it's looking to see what packages are available. And there's a GNU-Cobol 3, there's a GNU-Cobol 4, which has not been released yet. I guess it's pre-code, or beta code. And then we've got GNU-Cobol. GNU-Cobol will give you the most recent supported version. So we're going to go ahead and install that. That's going to install all the libraries, the compiler. It just sets everything up for you. And then we're going to go ahead and say cobc -- version. And you can see that we're at the GNU-Cobol 3.1.2 version. Now, there's also something else I would like to do here, but we're going to do it in Linux. You do all the exact same commands in Linux as you do here in the Windows Subsystem for Linux. But what I'm going to do next is I'm going to show you Linux up and running, and we're going to do this again. We're going to install these tools again. But then the other thing that we're going to do is we're also going to install the IBM Cobol compiler. And I'm going to show you how to download it, get a hold of that. But you're all set up right here. You might want to make a directory for documents, and then go into that directory and make a directory for Cobol projects maybe. So you can put your projects in there. And once you've got that done, you're really all set on your Windows. You can go ahead and start coding. But next, let's take a look at Linux and installing the GNU-Cobol compiler as well as the IBM compiler. Okay, so now what we have is we have Mint Linux up here and running now. Mint Linux is built on Debian, which Ubuntu is also built on. So this isn't going to be much different than what you saw in the Windows Subsystem for Linux. We're going to do everything on the command line. And the reason I like to use Mint Linux is because it's more like Windows 7. I'm a huge Windows 7 fan. I loved using it, very productive, and it just makes things easier. So let's get started. So the first thing you want to do, just like you did in Windows Subsystem for Linux, whether it be the Linux portion or the Windows portion, is you want to make sure your operating system is current. So I'm going to just say sudo apt update and type in my password. And what that command does is it downloads all of the catalogs, it puts the locations of the servers where you're going to need the updates from, puts those all on your computer. And I'm going to say sudo apt upgrade. And what that's going to do is it's going to download everything. So we've got 480 megabytes of stuff to download. Actually, we've got a gigabyte of stuff to download, but it's going to take up about 480 megabytes of space once it's downloaded and everything is updated. It might take a little while, 10 minutes. It depends upon the speed of your internet connection and the speed of your computer. So when that's done, we're going to go ahead and continue. Okay, now that probably took a little while if you're using Linux because there's also a GUI environment, there's LibreOffice, there's a bunch of stuff when compared to WSL, Windows Subsystem for Linux. So once you do the upgrade, I always like to do a sudo apt auto remove, and what that does is that deletes old files and stuff that were part of that for the installation. Okay, so now once you have it updated, now you have to install the build tool. So I'm going to say sudo apt install -y build essential. Now, as I said in the WSL part of this video, the -y just validates that yes, I do want to do it, so it won't prompt me for that whether or not I want to actually install those. Of course I want to install them. Okay, so the next thing I'm going to install, there's a lot more we can install here. I'm going to install Genie, because Genie is a great little editor for programming, programmer's editor. I can install the plugins for Genie. And the plugins are things like additional languages. In fact, Cobol might be actually part of the plugins. And then we're going to want to install a couple other things. Probably another nice little editor, gedit. And I think we're okay at that point. But then we also want to install GNU-Cobol. So I'm going to do a sudo apt search GNU-Cobol. And that search parameter is going to find all of the things in the product repository, the download repository that contains GNU-Cobol. You can see that there's 3 of them there. I don't want to install the 3 or the 4. The 4 is kind of still in beta, but I want to install the GNU-Cobol. And once that's installed, it's going to go really, really quick. Once that's installed, I'm going to just say cobc version. And there we go. So it shows when it was built. I'm just going to type in cobc, no input files. So that's great. So now you have GNU-Cobol installed. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but I also didn't reboot the operating system. A lot of times Windows requires you to reboot. Linux is not that way. So we went ahead and installed all that. Now, let's go ahead and download and install IBM Cobol. So IBM Cobol, you have to have a user ID to download it, but IBM's really good about that. I retired from IBM in 2013. The company isn't what it once was, but so let's go ahead and get rid of some of this stuff that Linux came about. Okay, So it looks like I am just going to skip all of this browser setup stuff because this is a brand new Linux, brand new Firefox browser. And okay, so to get to the IBM Cobol, I'm just going to type in download IBM Cobol x86. And you can see it right there, IBM Cobol for Linux on x86. It's www.ibm.com, so go ahead and click on that. And then when you click on the download 60-day free trial, it's going to come up and ask you to enter information about yourself. Now, they don't do anything with your information, but they just want to know who's got their trial software. Now, if you already have an ID, you can go ahead and log in. So actually, that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and log in to my ID. And I'm going to hide the ID stuff. And don't forget to hit continue. And then I'm going to put in my password. Okay, so it went ahead and downloaded. Now it's going to ask me to send a code. So I'm going to go ahead and take a look at the code that it sends me. Okay, so once you get your code, go ahead and put that in there. Now this code is only good once, so if you try to put my code in there, it won't. And believe it or not, the IBM website has gotten a lot better than it used to be. Okay, so I'm going to turn off notifications and click continue. And here's the file right here. I'm going to download it. There is no such thing for Windows. It's only for Linux, and you can install this on the Windows subsystem for Linux. There's another thing. You can go to the, if you scroll down, you can go to the Cobol for Linux x86 documentation. Now the nice thing about the IBM documentation is that it is not a subset of the Cobol language like the GNU-Cobol is. Now the GNU-Cobol, excellent product, but it's not 100% Cobol. So it might not be a bad idea for you to download. And I would probably say go to the PDF version documentation and download the programming guide. And I'm going to click on this. And I'm just going to hit the download button over here and send it to downloads. The language reference is a good one. And then the last one I would do is probably the installation guide. Go ahead and download that one as well. Now, if you just want to use them online, you have to keep track of the URL for that. But we're just going to go ahead and download them so we don't have to be on the internet to do that. Okay, so the IBM Cobol is still downloading. It's not that large of a download. I don't know why it's taken so long. But we'll go ahead and let that finish downloading. Okay, good. So now once everything is downloaded, you can close your browser. And I'm going to load my file program, my Explorer-like program. I'm going to go to Downloads. And there's my guides. Now I can change those to make them more a reasonable file name. But I'm just going to right-click on my IBM Cobol version 1.2. And I'm going to say Extract here. Now depending upon the Linux you're using, it might be a little bit different. I'm then going to go into the folder that was expanded, and I'm going to right-click on the background, and I'm going to say Open in Terminal. And then LS means display everything in that folder. So let's go ahead and make this a little more reasonable to view. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to execute this install program, and we're going to do it using the sudo command. So I'm going to say sudo /install. And I'm going to press enter. It's going to ask me to put in my password. Great. So what it's doing right now is that it's going out on the internet and it's looking for all the requirements that you need. This is actually a really good script. I've got a lot of complaints about IBM. I don't like the way that they do things with their employees these days. I don't like the fact that they've never been able to be a really good retail company, even though the IBM PC was the first business PC out there, arguably. But this is really a good script. It's going out and it's checking all of the requirements that you need on Ubuntu. Now I'm on Linux, which is, they're both Debian, so it's okay. It should work. We're going to see. But it says installation and configuration is successful. Okay, so now once that's done, I'm going to go to the OPT folder, and you can see the IBM directory underneath it. You can see Cobol. You can see 1.2.1 or 1.2.0, and you can see bin. And the command is cob2. That is the command to get to it. Now, I'm going to go back to my home folder, and I'm going to type cob2. And you notice it says cob2 wasn't installed. It doesn't know what it is that you're trying to do here. So I'm going to exit out of that, and I'm going to open up another terminal, and I'm going to type cob2 again. And that's the problem, is that you don't have the directory that IBM just set up. You don't have that actually in your path. So the next thing we need to do is we need to add that to our path. So I'm going to do a gedit of .bashrc. And this is the script file that is loaded every time that you load a terminal. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say export $path, or no, I'm going to say export path equals $path opt IBM, I believe it was Cobol, and let's make absolutely sure about that. Yep, it was Cobol. So we have to put the entire path into that, and we shouldn't have to do that again. And there's the entire path, IPT or OPT IBM Cobol 1. So I'm going to select that, and I'm going to say edit copy. And I'm just going to replace what I had previously typed in with that string. So what that means is that every time I then go into a terminal, it's going to automatically set up that. Now there's a couple other things that we need to do here, but let's go ahead and just do that. I'm going to close all my terminals, and I'm going to open up another one. And I'm going to say cobc. And there we go. No input. A cobc version. And there it goes. So you should be all set. Okay, we set it up in the path, but we want to make it available to everybody that logs in. We want to make those commands available to everybody. So what we're going to do is, and I will put these commands in the description of this video, but I'm going to create some links. And what this is going to do is this is going to allow me to create a soft link in the normal executable directory of user bin, which is going to allow me to run it even if I log in as non-me, or if I have an application that's run as non-me. What does that mean? Well, the .bashrc file, that's only for me. When I log into the Linux computer, that's only for me. But I want it to be for everybody, so this is what I'm going to do. Let's go ahead and expand this a little bit so you can kind of see it, the entire command on one line, and that's it. Okay, so I'm going to say password. Okay, now another one I want to do is I want to do the cob2 CFG, and we're going to put that into the directory etc cob2.cfg. Okay, so now there's links there. So if I were to log in as a different user, the links would be there. So let's say what else we want to do here to get set up. I think that's it. I think we're all set up on Linux now. So at this point I would log off, go ahead and install any other things you might want to install, and you should be ready now for Cobol programming on Linux. You might want to make one other thing. You might want to go into your files, maybe create a directory like we did in Windows Subsystem for Linux. I'm going to right-click here and say Cobol projects. And once you get all that done, you're now set.
Okay, so that's an overview of what COBOL is. It's an overview of how to get your environment set up. One thing I didn't mention, if you're a Mac user, how are you going to get your environment set up on a Mac? Well, the absolute best way to do this is to do it with a VMware guest operating system. For Linux, I went ahead and put a link to that video on the description of this video. So if you've never done that before, you can do VMware VirtualBox. I show you how to install it, everything you need to get started. Then you just issue these additional commands and you should be all set up. So we're on a COBOL journey together. See you at the next video.